So let me now reintroduce the guests we've been so fortunate to have with us throughout the Worldwide Exchange. Vince Farrell, CIO of Soleil Securities Group, is with us from New York, and Jim Rogers, CEO of Rogers Holdings, joins us from Singapore. And with us from Canary Wharf and London is CNBC's Steve Sedgwick. Gentlemen, at the end of it all, at the end of the shocking sequence of events around the Lehman failure, what has really changed about the way we do business 1 year later? Vince, let's start with you.
Well, Julie, I don't think much has changed at all because we haven't allowed anything to sort itself out. We tried to prop up the existing system. They probably have done a reasonable job of doing it, but it seems like we're kind of back to business as usual. That's not all bad. But last Tuesday, for example, there were more non-Treasury bond holdings sold than at any time this year. So the capital markets have improved, but we've improved going back to the old way of doing business. I don't see that we've had a lot of fundamental change. And I think we need some fundamental change. And we've talked about it earlier. We need to allow people that have made incorrect moves to fail. And until we do that, we're going to kind of repeat this thing over and over again. What I'm scared of is it will repeat it with sort of an accelerated pace. It was the late 90s where you had long-term capital, so you say, well, it was 10 years to the next big crisis. I'm afraid it won't be 10 years to the next big crisis, which we refuse to allow the system to cleanse itself.
Now, Meredith Whitney said last week on CNBC that she expects another leg down in this recession, especially when the Fed and the Treasury wean themselves off those programs that you mentioned, Vince. Now, when you remove that giant buyer we have in the U.S. government, the question is who will step in to fill that void. Jim, what do you think? Do you think we have another leg down this recession? Do you agree with Vince?
Well, Vince is correct that most things haven't changed at all, but one thing which has changed enormously is the fact that the Federal Reserve in the United States has tripled its debt on its balance sheet. It's taken on gigantic amounts of junk, as has the Bank of England, and the United States government has tripled, quadrupled, quintupled, who knows? They don't even know how much they've increased their debt. So we have a staggering amount of extra debt in the system, which is going to cause problems in the currency markets, the interest rate markets, the inflation markets down the road. Something's going to happen that's going to make things worse, whether it's this year or next year. I mean, when we see currency problems, when we see more protectionism come, this is not going to end very well at all, I'm afraid. Julia keeps calling for more regulation. Well, look, the problems came from the regulated sectors of the economy. It was the banks, very regulated, the insurance companies, very regulated, mortgage companies, very regulated. All of these problems came out of the regulated areas of the economy, not the unregulated areas of the economy. The problem was the regulators didn't know what they were doing. Greenspan encouraged things like derivatives. He encouraged subprime loans. He said all this stuff was good, and so did Bernanke. Bernanke told us over and over again, there's no problem in the housing market in the United States. I mean, the man monthly for years told us there were no problems. And now he's blaming it on the bankers.
I just wonder, though, Jim, if there are positives which we're not drawing upon as well in the world at the moment. Yes, we know there's a lot of imbalance, but surely that's going to address itself the more that we see strength coming out of the emerging markets. We see China, which has been relatively unscathed by this, building up domestic demand, which means sooner or later they're going to start servicing the domestic picture rather than the export picture, which could mean that we see developed capital markets as well in places such as China, which could well mean that the imbalances evaporate slowly over time. And let's face it, those global imbalances between U.S. debt, U.S. consumers and supply from emerging markets, that can't go on forever.
No, I agree. Look, Ross, all the money in the world is now in Asia. The largest creditor nations in the world are China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. All the assets are in Asia now. The largest debtor nations are all in the West. Yeah, it's going to resolve itself over time, but over time is a long time, I'm afraid. These things don't resolve themselves very quickly. And if you start having protectionism or currency crises, we don't have time. You know, a currency crisis, you can't sit around and say, look, guys, don't worry. Over the next 15 years, everything is going to be okay. They're worried about the next 15 minutes.
Jim Rogers and Vince Farrell, thank you for joining us, and you're sticking around.